On the 20th of September this year, three separate changes hit the age pension system on the exact same day, and they do not all point the same direction. One is a straightforward rate rise. One could quietly push tens of thousands of people onto a lower payment without them doing anything wrong. And one could open the door to a card worth thousands a year to people who currently miss out by a small margin. Let's go through all three, so nothing on the 20th catches you off guard. Start with the one everyone already expects, the regular indexation increase. Twice a year, the age pension rate is adjusted based on the cost of living, and the 20th of September is one of those two dates. The way it actually works is worth knowing, because it's not just a flat inflation adjustment. The rate moves according to whichever is higher out of two separate measures, the General Consumer Price Index or the Pensioner and Beneficiary Living Cost Index, which tracks cost of living changes specifically for households like yours, rather than the average household. On top of that, the combined couple rate has a floor underneath it tied to average wages, so it can't drift below a set percentage of what the typical full-time worker earns, regardless of what inflation does. Here's the part worth knowing before you get excited. Early indicators, based on inflation data from January to June this year, point to this being the smallest increase since March last year, likely under $20 a fortnight for a couple. The exact figure isn't locked in yet. By law, the government has to confirm it about a month out, so the real number lands around the 20th of August. If you're budgeting around this date, the honest expectation is a modest bump, not a windfall, and it's worth checking the confirmed figure yourself once it's published rather than going on an estimate. Now, the one that's easy to miss because it doesn't come with an announcement that feels like it's about you directly, the deeming rate increase. Deeming rates decide how much income Centrelink assumes your savings and investments are earning, regardless of what they actually earn, and that assumed income feeds straight into the pension income test. These rates were frozen for 3 years during the pandemic to protect pensioners from low real returns, and the government has been gradually walking that freeze back ever since, up by 0.5% in September last year, up again by 0.5% this past March. Early indicators point to another increase landing on this same 20th of September date. On its own, 0.5% doesn't sound like much, but National Seniors Australia estimates the cumulative effect of these increases could push around 180,000 people who currently get the full pension down onto a part rate instead, not because their actual savings changed, but because the assumed income on those savings just went up. If you're currently on a full pension and sitting reasonably close to the assets or income test thresholds, this is worth checking specifically, because it's the kind of change that shows up in your payment before it shows up in the news. Here's how the mechanism actually works, because it's not one flat rate applied to everything you own. Centrelink splits your financial assets into two bands. For a single person, roughly the first $64,000 is deemed at the lower rate, with anything above that deemed at the higher rate. For a couple, it's roughly the first $106,000 combined at the lower rate, with the remainder at the higher rate. Picture a single retiree with $200,000 in savings and investments on the full pension going into September. Neither their balance nor their spending changes at all. But once both deeming rates tick up again, the assumed income on the roughly $136,000 sitting above their lower rate threshold rises with it. And if that pushes their total assessed income past the cutoff for the full rate, their payment quietly drops to a part rate, through no action of their own. That's the exact mechanism worth understanding before the date hits, not after your first reduced payment arrives and you're trying to work out why. And finally, the one that's actual good news, sitting quietly behind the other two. The Commonwealth Seniors Health Card income threshold gets re-indexed on the same day. Right now, the cutoff sits at just over $100,000 a year for singles and around $162,000 for couples combined. On the 20th of September, those thresholds get replaced with new, higher figures in line with the cost of living. What makes this card genuinely worth chasing is that it doesn't test your assets at all, only your income, which is exactly why it catches people who assumed a paid-off home or healthy super balance rules them out. It doesn't. Picture someone who checked 2 years ago, came in a few $1,000s over the threshold, and never bothered checking again, assuming the answer would always be no. Each year the threshold has moved up with the cost of living since then, and on the 20th of September it moves again, which means that same person with the same income could now sit under the new cutoff without anything in their own life changing at all. The card itself is worth having. Cheaper prescriptions under the PBS, bulk billed GP incentives in a lot of areas, and other state and territory concessions on top. People sitting just above the current line are exactly the ones who should recheck their eligibility once the new figures land, rather than assuming last year's "you don't qualify" still applies. Here's what actually ties these three together. None of them are hidden or unusual. They're all published, scheduled parts of how the system runs. And if you go back to the last indexation date in March, the same three-part pattern played out then too. A rate rise, a deeming increase, and a threshold adjustment, all landing together. What makes the 20th of September worth paying attention to isn't that anything sinister is happening. It's that a genuine rate rise, a genuine risk of losing full pension status, and a genuine new opportunity to qualify for a valuable concession card are all landing on the calendar at once, pulling in different directions for different people. Treating the day as one single event instead of three separate things happening to work out is exactly how the deeming rate change catches people off guard, while the health card news passes them by unnoticed. Two changes make your fortnight better. One, depending on your own savings, might not, and it's the one that gets talked about the least, precisely because there's no announcement that says your name. So here's what's actually worth doing before the date arrives. First, once the official indexation figure is confirmed in mid-August, check your own new rate rather than relying on early estimates. Second, if you're on a full pension with savings or investments anywhere near the thresholds, run your own numbers against the new deeming rates once they're confirmed, so a part rate reduction doesn't arrive as a surprise, rather than something you saw coming. Third, if you've checked your Commonwealth Seniors Health Card eligibility before and come up just short, it's worth checking again once the new income thresholds are published. The margin that excluded you last time may not apply anymore. None of these three checks take long individually, but doing all three before the 20th, rather than reacting to whichever one shows up in your bank account first, is what actually keeps you ahead of the date instead of catching up to it. Two honest notes before you go. First, the exact indexation figures, deeming rates and income thresholds discussed here are based on the most recent published data and early indicators as of this recording. The confirmed numbers are released by Services Australia closer to the 20th of September, so check the current figures directly with Services Australia before relying on any of this. Second, this is general information, not personal advice. How these three changes affect your own payment depends entirely on your specific assets, income and circumstances, so this is exactly the kind of thing to confirm with Services Australia or a licensed financial advisor. If any of these three catches you off guard, tell me in the comments which one. It helps me know what to cover next. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.